I'm Richard Rellis, reporter here at the Arizona Republic and AZ Central, in the newsroom with Jay Diefenbach, who edits the pro sports coverage, and Dustin Gardner, who covers politics in the legislature for the Republic. Supreme Court ruling on sports gambling. What did the justices decide, and what does that mean for the state?
So this was a huge ruling. It changes the nature of sports gambling in America. Prior to this ruling, it had been illegal in most states for there to be any betting on professional sports games.
Under federal law?
Under federal law. Congress passed this law in 1992. So this ruling essentially allows states to determine for themselves if they're going to allow sports gambling, and that opens a lot of opportunities for Arizona. Right after the ruling, Governor Doug Ducey said that he's interested in allowing this potentially on some reservations.
Which, I mean, it could have been that he said, no way, we're not going to touch sports gambling, but he seemed to open the door to it being a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, he seemed more than open to it. He seemed eager about the possibility. You know, he even mentioned that this could be a new revenue source for the state budget.
Jay, how big a deal is gambling in sports these days?
Well, sports gambling itself is legal only in Nevada, of course, but here in Arizona, it could open a little revenue stream, you know, not a huge river, but sports gambling itself isn't a huge chunk of the Las Vegas money. A few $1 million could certainly help out here and there, though.
Could the market grow? Could people who aren't gambling on sports now decide suddenly this might be a good way to while summer away?
No doubt about it. It makes it easier for people like you and Justin to have their phone. There's an app. You know, DraftKings, the fantasy sports site, has already expressed interest in helping regulate the process. I'm sure Caesars International in Las Vegas wants a chunk of the national responsibility. So yeah, and it can be so easy for people who have not even thought about sports gambling up until now to make it their own little habit, which is kind of dangerous.
What do teams in the leagues think about gambling in general?
Well, their initial thought was, we don't want gambling because it's bad. Now that the courts have decided that the states have the option, every one of the leagues is very, very interested in it. They're saying, oh, absolutely, we're in 100%, and then parenthetically, what's our cut?
What would be the next steps for it to happen here? We're not talking about the legislature meeting in a special session anytime soon. What would be the next steps?
Yeah, so any changes have to be approved by the state legislature. There's been no discussion of a special session, so presumably this would come up next year. But it's important to remember that the extent of this is going to be determined completely at the state level at this point. So if the state only wants to allow it on reservations as part of Arizona's gaming compacts with the tribes, that would be limited to reservations. There have been discussions nationally about all the possibilities of people doing this mobily on their phones at games. We just don't know how far this is going to go. It might be limited to reservations. In the past, tribes in Arizona have raised concerns about efforts to legalize fantasy sports, for example. They're concerned that could cut into their revenue. So I think as this plays out, we'll see how far Governor Ducey and the legislature are willing to go, and whether there is that concern that this could somehow limit or somehow infringe on the gaming compacts with the tribes and limit their revenues.
And as it goes through, we'll be covering it every step of the way here at AZ Central from a sports perspective and from a political lawmaking perspective. So stay with AZ Central for updates.